Welcome to AI History of Western Philosophy. Today we're embarking on a truly fascinating journey, I think, to explore a figure who, well, despite being a man of action, advocated for one of the most abstract philosophies imaginable, Melissus of Samos.
Right.
You might not know his name as readily as, say, Plato or Aristotle, but I promise you, his ideas were profoundly influential. He stands as this pivotal, if sometimes overlooked, figure in 5th century BCE Greek thought.
Indeed. In this deep dive, we're going to get right into the core of his radical monism. What's fascinating here is understanding how this ancient thinker, really through sheer force of logic, pushed early Western thought to a crucial crossroads,
Yeah.
demanding that philosophy confront the very nature of reality itself, right from its, earliest stages.
Our mission today, here on AI History of Western Philosophy, is to unpack Melissus's entire system, understand the almost paradoxical nature of the admiral philosopher, and truly see how his uncompromising logic, his dedication to following reason wherever it led, sparked intellectual revolutions. Think about it. His ideas influenced everything from the earliest atomists to the sophists, and even shaped the foundational critiques leveled by giants like Plato and Aristotle.
Yeah,
It's quite the legacy for someone often sort of relegated to a footnote.
it really is.
So what exactly are the materials we'll be sifting through today to understand this enigmatic figure, this admiral, who, in essence, preached against the very world he navigated?
Well, we're drawing primarily from a comprehensive research report on Melissus of Samos. This report, it really masterfully synthesizes the fragmented remains of his original writings alongside scholarly interpretations from centuries of philosophical inquiry, and crucially, the historical context that helps us understand the world he inhabited.
Right, context is key here.
Absolutely. And it's vital to note that Melissus's original treatise, titled On Nature or On What Is, hasn't survived intact. Our understanding of his profound arguments comes almost exclusively from fragments, these direct quotations preserved by later authors.
Okay, so we're dealing with pieces.
Exactly. Pieces. And the most significant source is the 6th century CE Neoplatonist commentator Simplicius of Cilicia. He quoted Melissus extensively in his commentaries on Aristotle's Physics and on the Heavens.
Simplicius, right, saved a lot of these fragments.
He really did. But it means we're essentially piecing together a profound philosophical puzzle from these carefully preserved snippets. And this also means, as you can imagine, that we have to be acutely aware of the biases and philosophical agendas of his commentators.
Yeah, they weren't just neutral reporters.
Not at all. They selected and framed these quotations to serve their own purposes. It's like looking at a masterpiece through a series of very specific, sometimes distorting historical lenses.
Okay, let's unpack this figure, Melissus of Samos, then. He's often described as pivotal, but as we said, sometimes overlooked. What's the initial picture we get of him, especially given that intriguing title, the admiral philosopher? What makes that so captivating? It's not a title you hear every day in the history of philosophy.
Well, the paradox you mentioned is immediately palpable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Melissus was a Samian, which places him squarely in the tradition of Ionian inquiry.
Okay, Ionian, so focused on the natural world.
Exactly. The Ionians, thinkers like Thales and Anaximander, were renowned for their empirical cosmological investigations. They were interested in the natural world, in its processes, and its underlying material principles. Very hands-on in a way.
Right.
Yet despite this Ionian heritage, the content of Melissus's philosophy rigidly defended Eleatic monism.
The Eleatics, Parmenides. No change, reality is one.
Precisely. This is the doctrine from Elea in southern Italy, pioneered by Parmenides, which radically rejects multiplicity and, crucially, change. The tension couldn't be starker, could it?
No kidding.
You have a practical leader, an admiral, who, as we know, commanded the Samian fleet against Athens in real, concrete naval battles, championing a philosophy that denies the ultimate reality of the very world of conflict, motion, and multiplicity he was navigating and acting within.
So he's a man of action preaching anti-action. That's quite the twist. It's almost like a modern-day general arguing that war doesn't really exist.
Exactly. It's that level of seeming contradiction.
What does this biographical detail, this admiral philosopher persona, tell us about how his ideas were received, even in antiquity? Did people scratch their heads and wonder if he was serious?
Well, this raises an important question, and it's one that has fueled scholarly debate for centuries.
Yeah.
For critics like Aristotle, this tension between his active life and his abstract philosophy might have led them to believe he was a crude reasoner.
Crude, as in simplistic.
Yeah, that's the idea. Aristotle famously called his logic forticos, which can mean crude, unrefined, even simplistic, suggesting his all-or-nothing approach was perhaps characteristic of a military man who preferred clear, decisive conclusions over nuanced, subtle dialectic.
Like no shades of gray.
Exactly. It was seen almost as a lack of philosophical sophistication by some, a kind of intellectual bluntness, maybe. Yeah. But, and this is where modern scholarship increasingly diverges, that same rigor, that unflinching commitment to follow rational argument to its counterintuitive conclusion, well, that can also be interpreted as a testament to his profound philosophical integrity.
So maybe not crude, but just rigorous, extremely rigorous.
Precisely. Perhaps he wasn't crude, but simply incredibly rigorous, willing to accept the logical consequences no matter how much they contradicted common sense or everyday experience. This tension between his biography as a practical military commander and his philosophy as an astonishingly abstract system is a crucial interpretive lens for his entire project.
It suggests a really unusual mind.
Absolutely. A mind capable of both decisive action in the real world and an almost terrifyingly pure dedication to abstract thought. It's truly a unique blend in early Greek philosophy, offering a stark reminder that what seems practical to some might be merely an illusion to others.
Okay, that sets the stage beautifully for Melissus. Having glimpsed the man, let's now witness how his mind, much like his fleet, moved with an unyielding, almost terrifying force, charting a philosophical course that would demand a reckoning from every thinker who followed. But first, let's ground him even further in his time. We know very little about his life, sadly, but there's one pivotal historical event that anchors him firmly to a specific period. What was it, and why is it so significant for understanding his philosophical context?
His life is indeed anchored by a single, reliably attested historical event. He commanded the Samian navy during the Samian War in 1440 BCE.
Samian War against Athens, right?
Against Athens. And this wasn't some minor skirmish, mind you. He led his fleet to a significant, albeit temporary, victory against the formidable Athenian navy, which was, remarkably, under the personal command of none other than Pericles himself.
Wow, Pericles. So this was major league stuff.
Absolutely. Plutarch, in his Life of Pericles, recounts that Melissus skillfully exploited Pericles' temporary absence to attack and defeat the remaining Athenian forces, destroying many ships and securing control of the sea for Samos.
Quite the achievement.
A huge achievement, and this military feat is so significant that it provides the basis for the chronographer Apollodorus of Athens, placing Melissus's floor route, his peak period of activity, squarely in the 84th Olympiad, which corresponds to 440 BCE.
Okay, so that date is solid.
Very solid. And it isn't just a date, it places him directly within a period of intense intellectual ferment.
So this firmly places him as a contemporary of some really big names in Greek thought, not just as a general, but as a philosopher. But what did that bustling intellectual environment he found himself in look like? Who else was he clashing with, intellectually speaking, beyond the Athenian fleet?
It's absolutely vital because this date establishes him as a contemporary of the post-Parmenidean pluralists, thinkers like Anaxagoras and Empedocles.
Right, the ones trying to sort of save the appearances, make sense of change after Parmenides.
Exactly. They were trying to reconcile Parmenides' seemingly irrefutable logic with the apparent reality of change and multiplicity. And, perhaps even more significantly, he was a contemporary of the earliest atomists, Leucippus and Democritus.
Ah, the atomists too. Okay, so it's a crowded field.
Very crowded. And this contemporaneity complicates any simple linear narrative of influence, where one philosopher neatly follows and builds upon another in a straightforward progression.
Yeah, it's not like a neat timeline.
Not at all. Instead, it sets the stage for incredibly intricate and dynamic debates about who was responding to whom in the bustling intellectual environment of the mid-5th century BCE. He's certainly not an isolated figure, but a crucial, active participant in a lively, evolving philosophical conversation.
Ideas bouncing around.
Ideas were being thrown back and forth, debated, refined, and reacted against, often almost in real time, across different city-states and intellectual circles.
And he was a Samian. How does his Ionian heritage influence his philosophical approach, especially his very deliberate choice to write in prose rather than poetry, unlike Parmenides, who delivered his philosophy as a revelation from a goddess? That seems like a really important stylistic and methodological choice.
It's hugely important. Samos was a prominent Ionian city-state, a region, as we noted, known as the cradle of early Greek philosophy, characterized by its empirical interest in cosmology and the natural world.
Right.
Melissus's Ionian heritage is directly reflected in his choice to write his treatise in clear, unadorned Ionic prose. This aligns him with the distinct Ionian tradition of rational inquiry and public discourse.
So prose for arguments, not poetry for revelations.
Precisely. A medium designed for argumentation, for presenting a systematic logical case, rather than for mystical revelation or poetic pronouncements. This contrasts sharply with Parmenides' philosophical poem, which was written in epic hexameters and famously presented as a mystical journey where a goddess reveals the way of truth.
Yeah, Parmenides has the goddess.
Parmenides spoke as if from divine authority. Melissus, as if from pure reason.
So Melissus is, in a sense, demystifying Eleaticism, stripping away the poetic and mystical veneer. What are the consequences of this stylistic choice, particularly for how his philosophy was received and, perhaps ironically, critiqued? It feels like it opened him up to scrutiny in a new way.
This choice had a profound effect, both positive and negative. Parmenides' philosophy, by being presented as a divine revelation, was, in a sense, a doctrine to be received, to be accepted almost on faith in the authority of the goddess.
Right, harder to argue with a goddess.
Exactly. Melissus, by translating these core Eleatic tenets into transparent, deductive prose, transformed it into a clear, systematic, and crucially a debatable thesis.
Okay, so accessible.
Accessible, yes. This systematization made his arguments accessible. It laid out each logical step explicitly. However, this accessibility was a double-edged sword.
Ah, because people could pick it apart more easily.
Precisely. While it made his arguments clearer, it also laid their logical steps bare for rigorous critique. Aristotle's later famously harsh charge that Melissus's reasoning was gross and palpable, or hagrokateros and fallacious, was likely enabled by this very transparency.
Okay.
The alleged errors in his logic were easy to identify, precisely because he had laid them out so clearly and systematically. So in a strange twist, Melissus's chief methodological contribution rendering Eleaticism into a rational, systematic argument was also the source of its greatest vulnerability in the eyes of its critics.
It's like building a crystal palace. Beautiful and transparent, but every flaw is visible.
That's a great analogy. That's exactly it.
Speaking of influence, ancient sources often portray Melissus as a pupil or methetz of Parmenides, and even, in turn, a teacher or the diskalos of Leucippus, the founder of atomism. How reliable are these claims, especially given what we've just discussed about the textual nature of the philosophical conversation in this period? Are we talking actual classrooms?
Probably not. Modern scholarship treats these claims with considerable skepticism, and for good reason. It's far more likely that these labels are later biographical inferences based on perceived philosophical influence, rather than concrete evidence of direct personal instruction or formal teacher-student relationships.
So more like influenced by than taught by.
Almost certainly. There's simply no independent evidence of Melissus ever traveling to Elea to study with Parmenides, or of Parmenides visiting Samos. The discipleship was almost certainly textual.
Reading his poem, basically.
Exactly. Melissus engaged deeply with Parmenides' arguments as presented in his poem, carefully reading them and then seeking to defend, clarify, and systematize them within his own prose treatise. Similarly, the claim that Leucippus was his student is probably an inference drawn from the fact that atomism is, in many fundamental respects, a direct response to the specific philosophical problems posed by Melissus's particular formulation of Eleaticism.
Right, Leucippus read Melissus and reacted.
That seems much more plausible.
So we're looking at a vibrant interregional philosophical conversation conducted primarily through written texts. Melissus as a pivotal, highly engaged reader of Parmenides, and then, in turn, critically read and responded to by Leucippus. That makes a lot of sense, especially in an era where travel wasn't always easy or necessary for intellectual exchange, but scrolls certainly traveled.
Exactly. It speaks to the power and reach of philosophical texts, even in the ancient world. Ideas could cross oceans and inspire revolutions in thought without a single personal handshake.
Now let's get to the heart of Melissus's philosophy, his stark and uncompromising monism. It's a truly radical view of reality, one that strips away nearly everything we take for granted. Where does he begin his rigorous deductive journey to define what is this singular reality he believes in?
Okay, the starting point. His entire logical edifice, this grand system, rests in a single, powerful axiom, one which he shares with his predecessor Parmenides: the absolute impossibility of generation from nothing.
Nothing comes from nothing. Ex nihilo nihil fit.
Precisely. In his first fragment, fragment B1, which Simplicius fortunately preserved for us, he states it with forceful clarity. He writes, "What was ever, and never shall be. For if it had come into being, it needs must have been nothing before it came into being. Now, if it were nothing, in no wise could anything have arisen out of nothing.
Okay, pretty clear statement.
Very clear. This principle was a common intuition among many early Greek thinkers, but it was the Eleatics, and Melissus most explicitly, who grasped its radical metaphysical implications and deployed it with uncompromising rigor.
So it's not just an observation, it's the foundation.
It is the foundational, unshakable premise from which all characteristics of true reality, what he calls what is, will be logically and systematically deduced. It's his bedrock. If you grant him that one starting point, you're on a train that goes all the way to his astonishing conclusion.
So starting from nothing comes from nothing, which seems like a reasonable enough intuition for many. What attributes does Melissus then deduce for what is? How does he build this intricate chain of arguments, one leading to the next, like an unyielding logical domino effect?
Right, he constructs this systematic, almost architectural chain of deductions. Each conclusion he reaches then serves as a premise for the next step in his argument, creating this unyielding logical progression.
Okay.
This systematic method produces a detailed portrait of being as a reality, starkly at odds with the world of appearance, the world we think we inhabit. First, from the impossibility of coming to be, he deduces that being is eternal, or adian.
Eternal. No beginning, no end.
Exactly. If it never came into being, it could have no beginning or arch. And if it will never be destroyed, which is a direct corollary of the same principle, that nothing can become nothing, then it can have no end or telude.
Yeah.
In fragment B2, he states this plainly. Since it neither began nor ended, it always was and shall be, and has no beginning nor end.
Okay, eternal.
Now, this conception of being as sempiternal, meaning it exists endlessly through all past and future time, is his first significant departure from Parmenides.
How so? Didn't Parmenides say being was eternal?
Parmenides, you recall, described being as existing in a timeless, indivisible now, an eternal present, outside the flow of time. Melissus, however, gives it this infinite temporal duration, stretching infinitely in both directions. It's subtly different, more like everlasting than timeless.
Ah, I see. Through all time, not outside time.
Right. Then Melissus makes his most controversial and arguably his most innovative leap. In fragment B3, he argues that what is temporally unlimited, would have no beginning or end in time, must also be spatially unlimited, or infinite epiron, in magnitude. Metaphysics.
Whoa, wait. From eternal in time to infinite in space.
Yes. He states, now since it is infinite. This is a direct contradiction of Parmenides, who described being as finite, complete on every side, like the bulk of a well-rounded sphere, and held fast in the bonds of a limit.
Wait, an illicit slide from temporal to spatial infinity. That sounds like a logical trap, or at least a very shaky step in the deduction. Is this where the crude reasoner criticisms start to bite? Was this a genuine flaw, or is there a deeper interpretation that we might be missing because we only have these fragments?
This logical flight is precisely what drew the sharpest criticism from Aristotle. He identified it as a key fallacy in Melissus's reasoning.
Aristotle jumped on this.
Oh, yes. Aristotle argued that Melissus equivocated on the word beginning, illicitly moving from a temporal sense, like no beginning in time, to a spatial one, like no starting point in space. It's a classic ambiguity, perhaps a fatal one, depending on your interpretation.
So, a potential mistake in the logic.
It's a major point of debate. Whether Melissus had a more sophisticated defense that's been lost to us, or if he simply didn't see the ambiguity in his own reasoning, remains central to how we read him. But it certainly highlights the rigorous scrutiny his straightforward prose allowed, in contrast to Parmenides' more obscure poetic form.
Makes sense. It's laid bare.
Exactly. But having established being's infinity, controversially or not, Melissus then skillfully uses this new attribute to forge a novel argument for its unity, or hen.
Okay, so infinity leads to unity. How?
In fragments B5 and B6, he reasons that if being is infinite, it must be one. His argument is elegantly simple. Quote, for if there were two, they could not be without limit, but would limit one another.
Ah, because two infinite things would bump into each other, metaphorically speaking.
Precisely, they would impose boundaries on each other, which contradicts the idea of being truly infinite or unlimited. This argument is arguably clearer and more intuitive than Parmenides' own path to monism. It establishes a direct logical link. Infinity implies oneness.
Okay, that's pretty neat logic, actually.
It is, and from this proven unity, he then deduces absolute homogeneity. He argues that being must be entirely all alike or homogeneous.
Homogeneous, meaning
Completely uniform. Any internal differentiation, any qualitative difference or variation in density, for instance, would imply that being is composed of different parts, and if it had parts, it would be many, not one.
Right. Parts mean multiplicity.
So being, for Melissus, is a seamless, undifferentiated whole, utterly uniform throughout. No bumps, no blemishes, no variations, just pure being.
Okay. Eternal, infinite, one, homogeneous. What else?
Well, these attributes of unity and homogeneity then become the premises for denying all forms of change.
Ah, here comes the classic Eleatic move, no change.
Right. In fragment B7, he argues that any change whatsoever, be it alteration, like something turning from hot to cold, a rearrangement of its internal order, or even a change in size, is absolutely impossible.
Why? Because it would violate the homogeneity.
Exactly, he writes, for if it were to change, what there is could not be homogeneous, but what is in front would pass away, and what does not exist would come into existence. In other words, any change would destroy being's essential sameness, its unity, and would imply that something that is ceases to be, or something that is not comes into existence.
Which violates the nothing comes from nothing rule.
Precisely. It all ties back to that foundational axiom. Change is logically impossible for this kind of being.
Okay, so no alteration. What about motion, moving from place to place?
Motion, or kinesis, is rejected on different but closely related grounds. Melissus states that being is a plenum, meaning it is completely full, or pleon.
A plenum, completely full, no gap.
No gaps. For motion to occur, he reasons, there must be an empty space of void, or keinon, for a thing to move into.
Makes sense. You need somewhere to go.
Right. But, he argues with uncompromising logic, what is empty is nothing. What is nothing cannot be.
Ah, the void doesn't exist because it's nothing.
Exactly. Since being exists and is, by definition, full, and since the void is, by definition, non-existent, there's simply nowhere for being to move. It is therefore absolutely motionless.
That explicit connection between motion and the void seems incredibly important, almost like he's setting up the very terms of the debate for future philosophical developments, especially for those who did want to explain motion. He's putting his finger on a central problem that simply cannot be ignored.
Absolutely. This identification of the void as a necessary precondition for motion is one of Melissus's most historically significant contributions. He crystallized the problem. He laid out the exact logical terms that the atomists, as we'll see, would later have to address, and indeed would solve by affirming the existence of the void.
Right, they took his problem and flipped the answer.
Exactly. His argument, even if rejected, provided the very framework for the solution. He drew a line in the sand, daring anyone to cross it.
Then we get to fragment B9, which sounds like a real head-scratcher. But being one, it must not have a body. If it had thickness, it would have parts and would no longer be one. How can something be spatially infinite and full, as you just described, yet have no body? That seems to defy common sense, or at least our intuitive understanding of physical objects. My mind immediately goes to a boundless, ethereal mist, but then, if it's full, how is it not a body?
This is indeed one of the most perplexing passages in all of pre-Socratic philosophy, and it has vexed ancient and modern commentators alike. How can something be an infinite, full plenum, and yet be incorporeal?
Yeah, what does no body even mean here?
Well, one interpretation that has been suggested is that body should be understood in a very limited sense here. It could be a rejection of an anthropomorphic or zoomorphic conception of being. In other words, denying that being has the kind of body that could feel pain or anguish, which is consistent with his broader denials of sensation within being.
So not like a giant person or animal.
Right. But a more compelling and increasingly accepted line of recent scholarship argues that the key to understanding this fragment lies in the term thickness, or pachos.
Thickness. Okay.
In this interpretation, to have thickness means to be composed of distinct parts, and therefore, critically, to be divisible. So Melissus isn't denying spatial extension itself, which would contradict his argument for infinity.
Ah, so it's not about lacking size, it's about lacking parts.
Exactly. He's asserting being's absolute indivisibility. By denying it has thickness, he is denying that it has any internal parts into which it could be conceptually or physically divided, no matter how small.
So it's not about being non-physical in the sense of not having spatial extent, but about being utterly simple and without any internal division. To visualize that, we're talking about something infinitely vast, but you can't carve it up or separate any part of it. It's like pure, unbroken, cosmic stuff that defies segmentation.
Exactly. It's an infinite, full, extended, but absolutely simple and partless plenum. Think of it less as a typical physical object and more as a pure, undifferentiated extension, a seamless continuum.
Okay. Still hard to wrap my head around, but I see the argument.
It is difficult. The model for such a partless yet extended entity might have been the conception of the soul, psyche, in contemporary thought, which was often considered thin, leptos, and capable of a unified, indivisible state in contrast to the divisible body. This reading sees fragment B9 as the ultimate reinforcement of being's unity, making it a sophisticated metaphysical move rather than a logical blunder. It underscores that being is a continuous whole that is nonetheless profoundly simple, a single, boundless, undifferentiated this.
If all that sounds incredibly abstract and removed from our daily lives, Melissus brings it crashing down onto our everyday experience in fragment B8, making his philosophy shockingly radical. What happens to the world of our senses, the earth, water, fire, things being alive or dead, black or white, if Melissus's logic holds true?
Right, this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. The application of his rigorous logic to the world of appearance is utterly devastating. In fragment B8, he turns his logical apparatus on the very things we claim to know and interact with through our senses.
The stuff around us.
Exactly. He explicitly lists them. Earth and water and air and fire and iron and gold and what is alive and what is dead, what is black and what is white, and all the other things men say to be true. He then presents a stark dilemma.
Okay, what's the dilemma?
If these sensible things were truly real, that is, if they truly are in the Eleatic sense, existing as being does, then they would have to possess the very attributes of being he has just deduced.
They'd have to be eternal, unchanging, one, etc.
Precisely. They would have to be unchanging and forever be just as they are. But, he notes, our senses tell us the exact opposite. We observe that the hot becomes cold and the cold hot and the hard soft and the soft hard, and that all these things are altered.
Yeah, things change all the time. That's obvious.
Obvious to us, but for Melissus, the logical conclusion is inescapable and stark. It follows that we neither see nor know things that are.
So this isn't just a philosophical nuance, it's a bombshell. Melissus is essentially saying your entire world of experience, everything you see, touch, and feel simply doesn't exist. That's radical eliminativism. It completely annihilates the common sense world. If his logic truly leads to that conclusion, what are the full, shocking implications for how we perceive our daily lives?
Precisely. Radical eliminativism is the term. This goes much further than Parmenides' distinction between a way of truth, the realm of pure being, and a way of opinion, the realm of apparent change.
Yeah, Parmenides said opinion was flawed, but maybe not totally non-existent.
Right. Melissus isn't just saying one is more real than the other. He's asserting a complete denial of the existence of the phenomenal world. This position implies that the entire world of sensory experience, everything you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, is not just misleading, but a total illusion. The things within it simply do not exist in any true sense.
Wow, okay.
And this extreme stance creates the looming, indeed unavoidable problem of self-refutation.
Ah, yes. If only the one exists.
Then Melissus himself, the very book he wrote, and you, the audience listening to this episode of AI History of Western Philosophy, cannot exist. This renders his own philosophy, his utterance these arguments, an impossible act.
The ultimate paradox.
Exactly. This radical and seemingly self-contradictory consequence, born directly from his attempt to physicalize and systematize the Eleatic one, is precisely what made his philosophy such a potent and urgent challenge for his successors. It forced them to grapple with the very limits of reason and the relationship between thought and reality. It's the ultimate mic drop, but one that makes you question if the mic even exists.
It's clear Melissus wasn't just rehashing Parmenides, he was innovating. How does his version of Eleaticism compare to Parmenides, and what were the key doctrinal shifts he introduced that made his system so distinct? It feels like he made Parmenides' ideas both more accessible and, ironically, more problematic.
Yeah, to label him a mere follower of Parmenides, as some earlier interpretations might have, would truly obscure his significant revisions and the systematic way in which he reconstructed the Eleatic doctrine.
He really put his own stamp on it.
He absolutely did. While he built upon Parmenides' foundational rejection of coming to be from not being, his final portrait of what is markedly different. His work represents a crucial shift from what was primarily a logical or predicational monism in Parmenides to a more material or physical conception of being, even though this physicalization paradoxically led to the complete denial of the physical world of sense experience.
Right, that tension we keep seeing.
Exactly. This internal tension, created by his innovations, is what made his system both a powerful catalyst for subsequent thought and a very inviting target for later critique. Let's break down some of those key doctrinal differences again, just to be clear.
Good idea.
First, temporality. Parmenides saw being as timeless, in a continuous now. Melissus shifted this to an eternal, sempiternal being, existing endlessly through all past and future time.
Everlasting, not timeless. Got it.
Second, and this is perhaps his most significant departure, is spatiality. Parmenides described being as finite, like a sphere. Melissus made the controversial leap to a spatially infinite being, utterly without limit in magnitude.
The big one, infinite space.
Huge. Third, the basis of unity. Parmenides deduced unity largely from homogeneity. Melissus provided that new, clearer argument from infinity. If there were two, they'd limit each other.
Right, the mutual limitation argument.
Exactly. Fourth, the form of writing. Parmenides used epic poetry, divine revelation. Melissus used clear, deductive Ionic prose, making it systematic but also vulnerable.
Accessible but attackable.
You got it. Finally, the nature of being itself. Parmenides' being was primarily logical or predicational. Melissus' was more physical, a full pleon, extended in space. And paradoxically, this physicalization led to the more radical denial of the physical world.
He tried to make being tangible, and in doing so made the sensory world disappear. Wild.
It's deeply ironic, isn't it?
So he takes Parmenides' core idea and makes it both more systematic and, in some ways, more extreme in its consequences. How does his approach compare to another major Eleatic figure, Zeno, Parmenides' other famous associate who also defended monism? They seem to have very different strategies, almost like two sides of a philosophical coin.
Yeah, Melissus' approach contrasts sharply with that of Zeno of Elea. Zeno was the other major figure in the Eleatic school's second generation. Zeno's defense of Parmenidean monism was primarily negative and dialectical.
Negative, meaning he attacked opposing views.
Exactly. He didn't offer a positive, constructive account of the one, as Melissus did. Instead, Zeno aimed to show that the common-sense assumptions of plurality and motion lead to inescapable logical contradictions and absurdities.
His paradoxes. Achilles and the tortoise, the arrow.
Those are famous ones. Masterpieces of the reductio ad absurdum method.
Yeah.
They don't tell you what is, they tell you what cannot be if you accept the premises of multiplicity and motion. His goal was to show that our everyday experience of motion and plurality is internally inconsistent.
So Zeno tears down, Melissus builds up.
That's a good way to put it. Melissus offers a direct, constructive, and positive argument for the nature of the one. His method is not one of refuting opponents by showing their absurd conclusions, but of building a systematic deductive proof from a foundational premise, showing what must be true if his starting point is accepted. While both upheld the core Eleatic worldview, that being is one and unchanging, Zeno could be seen as the master of dialectical refutation, using logic to dismantle opposing views, while Melissus was the master of systematic construction, using logic to build a positive, albeit radical, account of ultimate reality.
Two sides of the same Eleatic coin, yet profoundly different strategies. One attacking what is not, the other building what is.
Perfectly stated.
Fascinating how different minds can tackle the same core problem from such distinct angles. But Melissus' philosophy wasn't a dead end. In fact, it became a critical catalyst. How did his radical monism influence the pluralistic materialists who came after him, particularly the atomists, and then the sophists? It's counterintuitive that such an uncompromising philosophy could inspire so much new thought.
It really is counterintuitive, but his systematic and radical formulation of monism created a philosophical crisis in the mid-5th century BCE that truly demanded a response.
A crisis, like people couldn't just ignore him.
Exactly. His work became an indispensable catalyst for the two dominant intellectual movements that followed. Pluralistic materialism, which gave rise to atomism, and rhetorical skepticism, which we see in sophistry. He distilled and crystallized the Eleatic problem, the problem of change and multiplicity versus the logical demands of immutable being in such a potent and unavoidable form that it necessitated these revolutionary solutions.
He set the terms of the debate.
He absolutely did, effectively laying down the gauntlet for future generations.
Let's start with the atomists, Leucippus and Democritus. How did Melissus' rigorous argument against motion, based on the non-existence of the void, inadvertently pave the way for their revolutionary ideas? It seems counterintuitive that an argument against something would inspire its creation.
It is counterintuitive, but this is perhaps Melissus' most crucial and ironic legacy. His logical chain was unyielding and clear. Motion requires a void. The void is equivalent to nothingness. Nothingness cannot exist, therefore motion is impossible.
Right, we covered that chain. Solid logic, if you accept the premises.
Very solid. And the atomists, Leucippus and Democritus, were profoundly impressed by the rigor of this argument. They didn't see an easy way to challenge its internal logic, as Melissus had laid it out. They accepted his premise that if there is motion, there must be a void.
Okay, they granted him that link.
Yes, but instead of accepting the conclusion, no motion, They did something brilliant. They inverted it.
Inverted it. How?
They started from a different premise, one that was, for them, undeniable. The sensory evidence that motion does exist in the world. They observed and experienced things moving all the time.
Okay, starting with experience, not just logic.
Right, accepting Melissus's direct and forceful link between motion and the void, that crucial if motion, then void step. They were forced to separate a revolutionary and counter-Eleatic conclusion. The void, or what is not, to Mihon, must exist.
Because emotion, it does exist.
Exactly, is a logical necessity for them if they wanted to account for the world of experience and movement. If motion requires void and motion is real, then void must be real too.
So, they essentially said, if motion exists and motion requires a void, then the void must exist, even if Melissus thinks it's nothing. That's an incredibly clever turn. How did this allow them to save the phenomena, as philosophers would say, and account for the sensible world while still respecting Eleatic demands for unchangeable being?
This move was absolutely brilliant and allowed them to resolve the Eleatic challenge while simultaneously preserving the phenomena of the sensible world. They effectively split reality into two fundamental principles, creating a kind of dualism.
Two principles, what were they?
What is two-on, which they identified with an infinite number of tiny, indivisible, and unchangeable particles called atoms, atomoi, and what is not, to be on, which they identified with the infinite void, kinon, in which these atoms move.
Atoms in the void, the classic atomist picture.
Exactly, and crucially, the atoms themselves possessed all the characteristics Melissus had painstakingly laid out for his one. They were eternal, they were indivisible, they were homogeneous, and they were unchangeable.
So the atoms are like tiny Melissian ones.
In a way, yes. But critically, they were plural in number. This allowed for multiplicity, which was essential for explaining the diversity of the world.
Okay.
This brilliant synthesis directly addressed the problem as Melissus had framed it. By accepting the existence of the void, they explained motion, and by attributing Eleatic qualities to their atoms, they accounted for stability and permanence. Their entire system was a direct, ingenious response to his challenge, taking his etherer and turning it into a both-hand.
Amazing. Taking the opponent's logic and using it to build something new.
A classic philosophical judo move.
And the sophists. We hear about Gorgias of Leontini and his famous work on what is not. How does that connect to Melissus's systematic deductive reasoning? Was it a serious engagement or something else entirely, like a parody?
Well, the influence of Melissus's systematic reasoning extended beyond natural philosophy and into the realm of rhetoric and sophistic thought. The sophist Gorgias of Leontini composed a dazzling rhetorical treatise titled On What Is Not, or On Nature.
On what is not. The opposite of Melissus's title.
Exactly. The very title is a clear and deliberate parody of Melissus's own work, On Nature or On What Is. In this piece, Gorgias famously deploys the same rigorous, deductive style of reasoning favored by the Eleatics, especially systematized by Melissus, to prove three progressively more skeptical theses.
Okay, what were Gorgias's theses?
First, he tries to prove that nothing exists. Second, he argues that if anything did exist, it could not be known by humans. And third, if it could be known, it could not be communicated to others.
Wow. Total skepticism. Nothing exists, can't be known, can't be communicated.
Complete skeptical breakdown.
So he takes the Eleatic method, systematized by Melissus, and turns it into a weapon of skepticism, showing how logic can dismantle any claim to truth, even its own. Here's where it gets really interesting, because it highlights the double-edged sword of rigorous logic. It's almost like Melissus provided the blueprint for his own deconstruction.
Absolutely. Gorgias's arguments directly target and invert Melissian and Parmenidean claims. For example, in arguing that nothing exists, he meticulously shows that being, if it existed, would have to be either eternal or generated, limited or unlimited, one or many. And then he brilliantly demonstrates that each of these possibilities leads to an inescapable contradiction, using Eleatic-style reasoning against itself.
Turning the logic inward.
Exactly. This tour de force of negative argumentation shows how the Eleatic method, once rendered transparent and systematic by Melissus, could be appropriated and weaponized for purely rhetorical or skeptical ends. It powerfully demonstrates the inherent power of logos of pure reason and argumentation to seemingly dismantle any claim to truth, including its own logical foundations.
A warning about the power of logic, maybe.
Or perhaps a demonstration of its limits. It was a profound intellectual provocation, building directly on Melissus's foundation, but twisting it into a radically different philosophical project, one that ultimately casts doubt on the very possibility of knowledge.
Let's talk about how Melissus was viewed by the philosophical giants who came after him. Plato, for example, often grouped him with Parmenides and Zeno. How did Plato engage with Melissus's ideas, especially within the context of his own emerging theory of forms? Was it a simple rejection or something more nuanced?
Plato's engagement with the Eleatics, including Melissus, is complex and absolutely central to the development of his own metaphysics. In dialogues like the Theaetetus and Sophist, Plato consistently groups Melissus with Parmenides and Zeno as proponents of a static, unified reality that fundamentally challenges the world of becoming the world of change and multiplicity that we experience.
Right, the unshaken heart of well-rounded truth versus the messy world.
Exactly. For Plato, the rigid monism represented by Melissus, this idea of an unchanging singular reality, is presented as a significant philosophical obstacle that his own theory of forms is explicitly designed to overcome.
So the forms are Plato's answer to the Eleatic problem.
In large part, yes. While Plato's forms are eternal and unchanging, much like the Eleatic one, they are also, crucially, a plurality, and they're designed to relate to and explain the changing world of particulars that we perceive through our senses.
So some scholars even suggest that Plato might have simplified Parmenides' more nuanced doctrine, making Melissus's more radical and, as you put it, physicalist version of Eleaticism the true target of his critique. Is there merit to that idea? It would make Melissus an even more central figure than we often think.
That's a very compelling argument in modern scholarship, and one with significant merit. In this view, Melissus, with his uncompromising logic and his explicit denial of the sensible world, represents the logical dead end to which a certain kind of strict monism inevitably leads.
The point where monism breaks down.
Sort of, yeah. The point where its conclusions become too extreme to sustain a coherent worldview that accounts for experience. From this seemingly inescapable dead end, Plato's own pluralistic idealism, with its multiple forms and its bridge to the phenomenal world, offers a philosophical escape.
So Plato offers a way out of the Melissian bind.
Exactly. Plato's forms embody the unchanging, eternal qualities of true being, but they allow for the existence of many such perfect realities. This plurality directly counters Melissus's absolute oneness. Furthermore, the forms provide a coherent explanation for the particulars in the sensible world, arguing that the sensible world participates in the forms, giving it a derivative but still understandable reality.
So sensibles aren't nothing, they're just reflections.
Reflections, participants, copies. Plato uses different metaphors, but the key is they have some reality derived from the forms, which counters Melissus's radical eliminativism. By targeting Melissus, Plato could demonstrate the necessity of a system that preserved both the permanence of true reality and the apparent reality of change and multiplicity.
A task Melissus's philosophy seemed to make impossible.
Precisely.
And then there's Aristotle, Melissus's most severe ancient critic, who famously called his arguments crude and eristic. What were Aristotle's specific charges, and why was he so dismissive? Was it purely intellectual disagreement or something more strategic at play for Aristotle's own philosophical project?
Aristotle undoubtedly stands as Melissus's most severe ancient critic. Across his works, particularly in the Physics and Sophistical Refutations, Aristotle dismisses Melissus's arguments as crude or forticos and eristic or eristicos.
Crude and eristic, basically calling him unsophisticated and argumentative just for argument's sake.
That's the gist of it. He uses these terms to suggest that Melissus's arguments were contentious, fallacious, and put forward merely for the sake of paradox rather than for the pursuit of genuine truth. This influential verdict, coming from a giant like Aristotle, colored the reception of Melissus's philosophy for over 2 millennia.
Ouch. A tough legacy to overcome.
Very tough. However, Aristotle's critique wasn't merely a general dismissal. It was a highly targeted attack on specific logical flaws he identified in Melissus's precise deductive chain. And significantly, this censure can be seen as a strategic necessity for Aristotle's own philosophical project.
A strategic necessity? How so?
Well, Aristotle's entire physical and metaphysical system, built on fundamental concepts like substance, form, matter, potentiality, and actuality, was meticulously designed to explain the very world of change and plurality that Melissus's philosophy declared to be an illusion, to be non-existent.
Right. Aristotle wanted to explain this world, the one Melissus denied.
Exactly. For Aristotle's project to even begin, this Eleatic obstacle, particularly as radicalized by Melissus, had to be thoroughly cleared away.
So it wasn't just a general dismissal, but a strategic necessity for Aristotle's own philosophy, which aimed to explain the very change and plurality Melissus denied. He couldn't just ignore it. He had to systematically dismantle it.
Absolutely. By labeling Melissus crude and eristic, Aristotle was engaging in a form of philosophical gatekeeping. He framed Melissus as a sophist, someone arguing for paradox's sake, rather than a serious natural philosopher whose fundamental challenge had to be met on its own terms.
Kind of sidelining him.
Precisely. This rhetorical framing allowed Aristotle to dismiss the radical Eleatic conclusion without fully grappling with its unsettling premise, that pure reason might in fact lead to conclusions that fundamentally contradict the evidence of our senses. This wasn't just a historical disagreement. It was a foundational clash between two profoundly competing visions of philosophy's purpose and its proper subject matter.
Okay, so what were some of those specific charges Aristotle made? You said they were targeted.
Very targeted. Let's look at a few. Firstly, he pointed out a fallacious inference. Melissus argued being is eternal because it's ungenerated. Aristotle said Melissus wrongly assumed if generated things have a beginning implies ungenerated things don't have a beginning. A formal logic error for Aristotle.
Okay, a technical point about implication.
Right. Secondly, Aristotle criticized the ambiguity of beginning, the jump from time to space. He said Melissus equivocated, using beginning in two different senses.
The temporal versus spatial slide again.
Exactly. Third, Aristotle identified a false premise about change. Melissus said change implies a beginning or passing away. Aristotle argued alteration can happen all at once, without that. He had a different, more nuanced view of change.
Okay, fourth.
A non sequitur on immobility. Melissus said being is motionless because it's one. Aristotle argued it doesn't follow. A unity can move. He gave the example of a body of water moving internally. Why couldn't the one?
Good counterexample.
And finally, Aristotle charged Melissus with the conflation of unity of form and unity of matter. Aristotle argued Melissus's argument, at best, proves the unity of stuff, matter, not a unity of form. A man and a horse might share matter, but they aren't one being.
Introducing his own form-matter distinction.
Exactly. Shows how deeply Aristotle needed to pick apart Melissus's arguments to make space for his own more complex metaphysics that embraced change and plurality.
So, those are incredibly specific logical attacks. It really highlights how Aristotle needed to dismantle Melissus to build his own system. Thankfully, modern scholarship has started to reevaluate Melissus, moving away from Aristotle's harsh verdict. What's the modern take on his stature, and how are contemporary scholars tackling problems like his self-refutation, which seemed like such a fatal flaw?
Yeah, modern scholarship has indeed begun to robustly challenge the long-standing Aristotelian verdict. While some still view him as minor or flawed, there's a growing consensus that has reevaluated his importance significantly.
So giving him more credit.
Much more. This revisionist view argues that Melissus was a crucial innovator whose systematic presentation of Eleaticism in clear prose was absolutely essential for its profound influence on later thought. Scholars now increasingly emphasize that it was often Melissus's specific version of Eleaticism with its spatial infinity, its denial of the void, its radical eliminativism that thinkers like the atomists, Plato, and Aristotle were directly responding to.
So he wasn't just a footnote, he was setting the agenda they reacted to.
Exactly. In this light, he's seen not as a mere footnote to Parmenides, but as a central, independent figure in his own right, who pushed Eleatic thought to its logical extreme, forcing a philosophical reckoning.
And that profound problem of self-refutation from fragment B8, if only the one exists, then Melissus, his book, and his audience don't exist, how do scholars navigate that seemingly impossible utterance? It feels like the whole system collapses under its own weight. It's almost like Melissus is winking at us from across the centuries, daring us to take his logic to its ultimate mind-bending conclusion.
Yeah, this problem of self-refutation is a key focus of contemporary analysis, and it's certainly the most challenging paradox Melissus presents. One view, echoing Aristotle, is simply that Melissus failed to see the contradiction, which would support the crude argument.
He just missed it.
Possibly. But a more charitable and philosophically rich interpretation suggests that Melissus might escape the charge by making a very sharp distinction between a logical contradiction and what philosophers call a performative contradiction.
Performative contradiction, what's that?
It's like saying, "I'm not speaking now." The statement itself contradicts the act of stating it. So Melissus argues for a reality where his book, his argument, can't exist.
Right.
Now, given his radical distrust of all sensory and empirical evidence, remember, he says we neither see nor know things that are. He might argue that the evidence of his own existence as a speaker, or of his book, or of his audience, is itself part of the grand illusion of the senses.
Ah, so the act of speaking is just another illusion.
Exactly. And therefore, this illusory evidence has no power whatsoever to refute a conclusion arrived at by pure, unadulterated reason. For Melissus, the truth of logos of reason and its deductions is a purely metaphysical matter, entirely independent of whether any illusory being is there to state it or perceive it.
Wow. That's really doubling down on reason over experience.
It's an extreme form of rationalism. He's saying, in effect, my argument is true, even if the act of saying it can't truly exist in the ultimate sense. It's a mind-bending move.
That's a truly mind-bending distinction. It almost feels like he's saying, my argument is true even if the act of saying it can't truly exist. And how are contemporary analyses refining our understanding of those other tricky fragments, particularly B8 on the sensible world and B9 on incorporeality?
Well, on fragment B8, the debate centers on the precise scope of his denial. Is he arguing that the objects of sense experience simply do not exist at all, radical eliminativism? Or is he saying they exist but are not real in the robust, unchanging, Eleatic way of the one, meaning they are merely appearances?
So, non-existent versus just unreal.
Kind of. While the latter is a possible reading, the force of his language, that we neither see nor know things that are, strongly points toward the more radical conclusion that the phenomenal world is simply non-existent. He pulls no punches. It's a complete wipeout of sensory reality.
Okay, leaning towards eliminativism.
That seems to be the stronger reading. On fragment B9, the paradox of an extended yet incorporeal being remains a hotbed of scholarly debate, as we discussed. However, the emerging consensus moves away from seeing this as a rejection of spatial extension itself, which would make his arguments for infinity illogical.
Right. The thickness means parts interpretation.
Exactly. It's increasingly seen as a powerful argument for the absolute indivisibility of being. By defining thickness, Pachos, as having parts, Melissus can assert that being is an extended, continuous whole that is nonetheless profoundly simple and utterly partless. This is a significant and sophisticated metaphysical move, anticipating later philosophical concepts of pure continuity or indivisible substance.
So even the tricky bits show a certain logical sophistication, maybe not crudeness.
That's what many modern scholars argue. It's a testament to his logical rigor, even if the conclusions are challenging to our ordinary way of thinking.
So what does this all mean for the trajectory of metaphysics? When we synthesize Melissus's contribution, what's the big picture for us here on AI history of Western philosophy?
Melissus of Samos emerges from this analysis not as a minor disciple or a crude imitator, but as the great systematizer and radicalizer of Eleaticism.
Systematizer and radicalizer. Good summary.
Yeah. By transcribing Parmenides' poetic revelations into the clear, deductive prose of Ionian inquiry, he transformed monism into a transparent and eminently debatable philosophical system. His crucial innovations, particularly the introduction of spatial infinity, and his explicit, uncompromising argument against the void, fundamentally altered the Eleatic doctrine, making it both more robust in its logical structure and, ironically, more vulnerable to specific critiques.
Stronger, but also easier to attack.
Exactly. He pushed the logic of monism to its ultimate, most extreme conclusion, forcing a confrontation with the world of experience that Parmenides had managed to hold at arm's length. In doing so, Melissus posed the problem of the one and the many in its most acute and unavoidable form, thereby setting the essential philosophical agenda for his immediate successors, the atomists and the sophists, and indeed for generations of metaphysicians to come.
He really threw down the gauntlet.
He did. His work is a foundational challenge, an intellectual dare that reshaped the very landscape of philosophy.
He truly posed the problem of the one and the many in its most acute form, effectively setting the philosophical agenda for generations to come, from the atomists and sophists to Plato and Aristotle. So, what's his enduring relevance for you, the listener, today, as we reflect on this episode of AI History of Western Philosophy?
Well, beyond his specific historical influence, the philosophical project of Melissus holds an enduring and profound relevance. His unflinching willingness to follow a rational argument to a conclusion that utterly annihilates the entire world of common sense and sensory experience represents a truly audacious and profound commitment to the singular power of logos of pure reason.
That commitment to logic above all else.
Above everything else, he poses a timeless and unsettling question that echoes through the entire history of philosophy, from Descartes' meditations to Kant's critiques, and even into contemporary debates about the nature of reality and consciousness. When the dictates of pure reason conflict directly and irreconcilably with the evidence of experience, which should we trust? which holds ultimate authority?
Reason versus the senses. The classic dilemma.
It's one of the perennial questions.
Melissus's uncompromising answer in favor of reason continues to serve as a radical benchmark in the perennial debate between rationalism and empiricism. It makes you wonder, if you were forced to choose between what your mind tells you must be true and what your senses tell you is true, which path would you follow? That's been a deep dive into the mind of an admiral philosopher for AI History of Western Philosophy.
And that's something for you to mull over as you navigate your own understanding of reality and perhaps the illusions within it. Thank you for joining us on AI History of Western Philosophy.
Join us next time as we continue to explore the foundational ideas that shaped Western thought.